How far would you go if you lived under a tyrannical dictatorship? How far would you go saying that you're just doing your job? Let's take Nazi Germany, because it's the de facto totalitarian state. If you were in Nazi Germany as a teacher, would you turn in your Jewish student if it was part of your job? If you were working in a hospital, would you turn in those who were terminally ill or disabled in certain ways? Or if you were in the military or law enforcement in Nazi Germany, would you transport those groups of people to camps, knowing that they would be likely to be killed? Because during the Nuremberg trials that took place afterward, the people who were on trial said over and over again they were just doing their jobs. I recently put out a video about the Count Dankula case, which was when a guy uploaded a comical video, to YouTube of his dog doing a Nazi salute. He's being charged criminally over in Scotland. And in that video I said that the judge should have been unwilling to sentence him. Should have said, no, this is wrong. I got a lot of response back, and those in Europe, the international, if you will, audience, said, well, how could he resist? That was his job. How could he say no? It's his job to enforce the law. I think this is one of the biggest cultural differences between that part of the world, Europe, and the United States, is that in Europe, the government is seen as moral, right? I mean, it's seen as being right. And here in the US, there is more of an emphasis on morality and on personal responsibility as well. That there is this idea that is, well, very popular, that a person makes his own decisions, and it's his responsibility, regardless of which way things end up, it's him who has to make his own decisions. That, that judge could have refused to sentence the guy, or stepped down if that's what he had to do. But that was his decision. It wasn't the fault of somebody else. Yes, it was a bad law, but it's his decision to play that role in it. And if things are to get better over there, it would actually require a cultural shift in favor of personal responsibility, in favor of morality, like we have over here. I have to wonder just how bad things have to get before people start saying over there, I'm not willing to do that. How bad does that have to get? And I wonder because there's a recent case in which a 19-year-old girl has been sentenced for a hate speech violation. She's 19 years old, and she went on Instagram because she's a 19-year-old girl, and she went on a post of a young boy in her community who died in a car accident, a 13-year-old boy. And she decided to post some rap lyrics that had moved her. It was supposed to be a tribute by a rapper called Snap Dogg. No, not Snoop Dogg, this is somebody different. But the lyrics were about like you'd expect from just about every rap song ever. They were offensive. So what happened? Well, somebody called the police to report this hate speech. Then the police got involved and the police arrested and charged her. And then the prosecution service, like over here, like the district attorney, decided to prosecute the case. And then, finally, the judge found her guilty and sentenced her. All of those people were in positions where they could and should have said, this is wrong. This is immoral. We value freedom of speech. Even speech that we don't like. Else rap music wouldn't exist. No, but seriously. They all were in those positions and none of them did. She was sentenced to, I think, 8 months of community service, along with a £500 fine, which is a lot of money for a 19-year-old girl. She could have been sentenced to prison, and that's probably going to start happening. But nobody's willing to speak up because they're all like, well, all the law's on my side. I mean, remember that, over in Nazi Germany, to go back there again, he was democratically elected. These were laws that they were following. So, yeah, I mean, individual people have to make moral decisions. You can't rely on the government to be moral for you. And why would the government be moral if its people are not? There's another case, also in England, in which a very sick, or dying, it's believed to be dying, toddler called Alfie Evans is over there in a British hospital. And the parents would like to take that child, who is dying, and take him over to Italy in the belief that he'd get better care there. They won't allow it to happen. The British courts won't allow it to happen. You see, the doctors want to end life support and stop feeding him. In other words, starve him. I mean, they're not even just ending life support, they're actually starving him when he might otherwise survive and who knows, even thrive. But they're not being allowed to take their child over to Italy. The Italians have even given this little boy citizenship to try and help in the process of getting him out of that horrible situation. No, the courts won't allow it. Now, one thing that I found especially shocking is that there are pictures of the police lined up outside the hospital where that child is being held and starved to stop people from entering to help him. And this is what I'm talking about with personal responsibility, because you know what those cops are saying? I'm just doing my job. No. It's not an excuse to say, I'm just doing my job, when your job is immoral. Get out of the way. It's unbelievably immoral. But no, the government is supposed to... See, this is the thing. Over here, we have God. I'm just going to tell you how it is. Over here in the United States, God is like the supremely moral being. Okay? Over there, government takes the place. Just like you see in communistic states, where government becomes God. And that's the problem, is that government is being seen, it's been moralized. And it's not. It's an inherently immoral institution. The bigger that it gets, the less moral it becomes. You know, that's why it needs to be small, because we need some government, but the bigger it gets, the worse it gets. But that judge in that case over there said, no, you can't take your dying child and feed him. And the police just standing outside the hospital. If ever there were a need for a well-regulated militia, this would be it. And you know, here in the US, police don't, I think they'd be much less willing to do something like that, to try and starve a child and enforce that. Not just because of what I was already talking about, this individual responsibility, which I do think would play a role, but also because the people are armed. And that stops... It puts a cap on tyranny. When law enforcement groups know that if they were to go against the masses of the people, because believe me, over in the UK, the people are on the side of the little boy. But if the police were to go against the masses of the people, that they'd face resistance, an armed resistance even. Over there's no concern, no worry. And there should be. Seriously, individuals in law enforcement or anything else ought to be afraid to act like that, to want to starve a toddler, and then pat yourself on the back and sleep well at night because, well, I was just doing my job. No, you just shouldn't be able to do that. And you know, there's this thing about how you ought to protect the liberties of people, other people, because eventually it will come back and affect you. This enlightened self-interest. And I would think that that would at least be playing a role, but it's not. I don't know if people are just so ignorant of history now. That could be it. But there's a guy, Thomas Paine, who was hugely influential in the founding of America, and is a leader of American philosophy. And he said something in this respect. A famous quote, and here it is. Quote, "He that would make his own liberty secure must guard even his enemy from oppression. For if he violates this duty, he establishes a precedent that will reach to himself." End quote. Because a government never scales back. A government never gives you more of your liberties back. So when the government is stomping on the rights of somebody, it's just going to keep stomping until eventually it will affect you. So even if you're not a moral person, at least enough to care about that other guy, you have to at least care about yourself and your own family, because it's coming for you too. Now, moving on a little bit to freedoms here in the United States. I've heard a lot about this topic of, well, who needs an AR-15? It's the semi-automatic rifle that's been used in several mass shootings. And there's a recent case that makes a point. And of course, an AR-15 is essential for, well, not an AR-15, but an actual semi-automatic rifle is essential for keeping a cap on a tyrannical government. Without that, you don't really have a chance. And that was the whole purpose, right, of this right to bear arms, was to prevent a tyrannical government. But in everyday lives, there are reasons for an AR-15 too. I believe it's the most popular gun for home defense. Over in Florida, in a city called Glen St. Mary, there was a case where 3 men were sleeping in a mobile home, otherwise known as a trailer, when 7 home invaders came in, bashed the door in, yelled sheriff's department, and started firing pistols. The men inside the trailer fired back with an AR-15 and at least 1 handgun. 30 rounds. Now tell me how those men would have been able to defend themselves if they had a 10-round pistol. Because that's where the conversation is going. You got those on the left saying, well, you don't need high-capacity magazines, which is over 10 rounds, and you don't need semi-automatic rifles. You're just there with your little pistol. Well, what when you have more than one intruder? In this case, several of them were injured, and they were caught and arrested. Those that fled were caught by the police. And there are millions of cases, in the United States every year in which people do defend themselves with guns, either just by brandishing the gun and the person fleeing, or actually shooting somebody. It's a moral thing for the person defending to be at least as well armed as the person attacking. Not all lives have the same value. This is actually kind of intrinsic in our justice system, is that the right of the innocent victim is worth more than the right of his oppressor. That kind of underscores self-defense laws. So, yeah. Now, there was the case over at a Waffle House in Tennessee in which a crazy guy who had illegally accessed an AR-15 went into this Waffle House and he shot several people. And there was this heroic guy who managed to tackle him, from the side. The guy didn't see him coming, wrestled the gun away from him and threw it over the counter. And then the attacker ran off. Leftists are saying, look what can happen. An unarmed guy can take away the AR-15. And I'm just mentioning this because it's the most ridiculous argument I've ever heard, in so many different ways, and there's so many disconnects. And one is, well, if an unarmed guy can take away the AR-15, then what's the problem? Why are AR-15s so dangerous? Another is that, of course, if you had a gun, it would be a lot easier to fight back against the other guy who has a gun. It's just... But these are the same people who, when talking about the Florida school shooting, said, well, the police couldn't go in because the police had pistols, and the other guy had a rifle, and thus it just wouldn't work. So there's a lot of inconsistency in the left's arguments, is my overall point here. But a Waffle House it's the only restaurant I remember entering, in North Carolina at least, that has a sign that says no guns. Waffle House restaurants are gun-free zones. Just like schools are. You don't see many attacks on gun stores, do you? There's a pattern emerging after a while, and people just want to ignore it. Alright, well that's it for now. If you like the video, please like it and subscribe. If you do subscribe, make sure you hit the bell, otherwise you won't get notified. And I've got other links in the description as to how you can constantly stay updated, because you never know when YouTube is going to have technical issues that affect conservatives only. Alright, if you could share the video, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Health-wise.